Good morning, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. A copy of the Open Meetings Act is located on the table outside the door as well as on our website. There's also an automatic external defibrillator available in the back of the legislative chambers. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. With that, again, good morning. We'll begin with the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Equalization. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Boyle.
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh. Here. Commissioner Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Present.
Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Madam Chair.
Present. Item A, approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. And item B, call for a meeting and set April 5th, 2022 as a date for hearing on certified assessment corrections reflecting the addition of omitted property to the tax rolls or increased value on property. Is there a motion to approve A and B?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Morgan. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Citizen comments. Is there anyone in the chamber or on Zoom wishing to speak to the Board of Equalization about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to resolutions. We have 3, D, E, and F. We have Mr. Goodwillie coming up. Is there one in particular, or?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor, Register of Deeds Office. Specifically, I want to address Resolution D, the recommended denial of 2 permissive exemption applications. And the reason I want to address it is the applicant is here today and wants to speak. I've had several conversations with him, and I know he told me he was going to be here. Let me walk you through some background here, and then I'll get out of the way. There are 2 applications here, one for somebody called Red Maple Academy, and the other called Red Maple Elementary. They're kind of all over the place in the sense that they seek exemption under, by turn, Ag Society, Educational Organization, and religious entity. After further inquiry, can we get this? Can somebody help me with this? Do it that way? All right. One of the applications is for this single-family residence, and the other application, up in the upper right-hand corner is the parcel number, is an additional lot owned by the same individual, and that was the second parcel in the second application. We had never heard of anybody called Red Maple Academy or Red Maple Elementary. So we did what we often do when we get a new organization. We went out to the internet. We found no internet presence. Since most of the entities that apply for exemption are domestic nonprofit corporations, we went to the Secretary of State's website and we found nothing. There's no 501c3 tax exempt certificate. There really aren't. In fact, we even went to the Department of Education to see if they had any kind of record of a school by that name or an applicant to be a school by that name. In fact, we even went to check with the Walnut Ridge Homeowners Association, since the covenants say you have to use your property for residential purposes unless you get some kind of a variance, and there was none of that either. So we sent an email with a number of questions to Mr. Morse, the owner of the 2 properties. And what we got in return were the questionnaires that we asked for with new applicants. And the reason nothing showed up on the radar screen is it's simple. This is a privately owned personal dwelling by owned by Mr. Patrick Morris, and it's where they homeschool their 3 children. There are two reasons for the denial of the application, or our recommended denial of the application. First, for exemption in Nebraska, there's a 5-part test. The first test is the property must be owned by an organization organized and operated exclusively for educational, religious, charitable, or cemetery purposes, or an organization basically created by the host organization and operated exclusively for its benefit. In this instance, the property is owned simply by a private individual. And second, there's a use issue. The third part of the exemption test is the property must be used exclusively / predominantly for religious, educational, cemetery, or charitable purposes. And in this instance, even if you are homeschooling your children for what might be a traditional school day or even longer, it's still your dwelling 24/7. That's the predominant use of the property. Before I step back, I will point out there actually is some case law with respect to single-family dwellings and exemptions. There is a case involving a parsonage owned by the Methodist Church. There was a case involving the university president's house owned by Doane College. In both of those cases, the Supreme Court granted the exemption, but I think there are some real distinctions. One is that in both of those instances, the houses were actually owned by an organization that fit the definition in the first part of the Nebraska exemption test. And the second part was, well, it was transitory housing, first of all, and it was required by the organizations that the minister or the university president lived there. All sorts of functions were performed at that dwelling, and the way the court characterized it was the house had become an integral part of the operation of the church or the operation of the university. In this case, it's still a single-family dwelling 24/7. There's no real larger organization that's involved here. I mean, this is what they must call the schooling that they provide for their children. I have spoken to Mr. Morris. He's perfectly sincere. But no matter how sincere he is, I don't think these properties qualify, and so we would recommend denial of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Mr. Morris in the audience? Hi, do you want to come forward?
No, not at all. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, that was loud. I have.
If you could just state your name for me.
Patrick Morris.
Thank you.
I have affidavits that I can.
And then you can hand to
hand
the
everyone?
clerk here, and he'll pass them out to us.
I made 10, but
And just since this is your first time, we have a light system that you see sitting in front of you. But when it becomes, a yellow light comes on, there's 1 minute left. I'll just
Okay.
tell you you have 1 minute so you know where you are in your thoughts.
Thank you.
And we'll wait until
Okay.
they're passed out to get started.
Yeah.
They're all stacked.
Yep. It's
Okay,
just
I
like
gotcha.
then that's. Yeah, each one is a separate. That goes one. Oh, we do your own. Like, there is one for you.
Okay,
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to read with this if you want to follow along.
Okay.
Number one is the Nebraska Administrative Code, Title 35, Chapter 40, Section 002.03 reads, "The following property is exempt from property taxes." That's in your attachments behind this form. Subsection 002.03C states, "Property owned by educational, religious, charitable, or cemetery organizations, or any organization created for the exclusive benefit or any qualified organization and used exclusively for education, religious, charitable, or cemetery purposes. The property cannot be, one, owned or used for financial gain or profit to either the owner or user. Two, use for the sale of alcohol liquors for more than 20 hours a week. Or three, owned or used by an organization which discriminates in membership or employment based on race, color, or national origin." That attachment is the same. The definition of organization is as follows: a generic term for any type or group or association of individuals who are joined together either formally or legally. The term organization includes a corporation, government, partnership, and any type of civil or political association of people. The definition of group is as follows: two or more figures forming a complete unit in a composition. Or two, a number of individuals assembled together or having some unifying relationship. The marriage of myself, Patrick Aaron Morris, and Nadia B. Perez, now Nadia B. Morris, is not only licensed and recognized by the County of Douglas and the state of Nebraska, but by definition qualifies as a group and an organization. Subsection 002.03C does not indicate that organizations need to be licensed, certified, incorporated, accepted, recognized, or meet any qualifications of any government agency. Nor is there any stipulation put forth or referenced as to the validity, creation, operation, charter, or any other regulation outside of the word itself. Red Maple Academy Elementary is an educational organization that is recognized by the Omaha Public School District and the Commissioner of Education, which is attached. Red Maple Elementary is completely reliant on the success and efficiency of the organization of Nadia B. Morris and Patrick Aaron Morris. Red Maple Elementary's pupils are aged 5, 8, and 12. They are involved in their respective curriculum year-round and spend up to 10 hours a day for all general subjects, as well as an additional 1 hour every evening for religious studies. See attachment. Nebraska is a state that does not have a minimum amount of days required per school year or hours per day for primary or secondary education. The national average for days a year is 180. The national average for minimum hours a day is 6 hours for secondary education, under 6 for primary education, and significantly less for kindergarten. The average cost per pupil in Douglas County, Nebraska, Omaha Public School District is $14,030 per year. See attachment. Excuse me. The average cost of 3 pupils in Douglas County, Nebraska, Omaha Public School District is $42,090 a year. The average cost for the pupils at Red Maple Elementary, ages 5, 8, and 12, for the remainder of their primary and secondary education, K through 12, if enrolled in public schools in Douglas County, Nebraska, Omaha Public School District, would be $392,840. The property taxes on parcel number 240-912-6186, located at 3806 North 158th Street.
1 minute.
Omaha, Nebraska, is currently $5,763.42 a year. The property taxes on the same parcel over the next 13 years, if the taxes remain the current figure, would be $74,942.46. A permissive exemption from property taxes for parcel number, already mentioned, for over the next 13 years, being the remainder of Red Maple's pupils, ages 5, 8, and 12, primary and secondary education, will save the Omaha Public School District $317,915.54. I have attached I have following cases that are exemptions to show that there have been exceptions made at all levels of adjudication.
All righty. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from board members at this time? Commissioner Friend?
Yeah, I didn't know if I was first or not, but, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, thanks for coming down here. You alluded to, boy, I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to give you all of them. What you alluded earlier to in your statement to comparables. Can you tell me which document that was? Who else? I guess what I'm getting at is, are there any comparables in relationship to Red Maple? Where am I looking at here? So, in other words, is this simply a one-off, or can it be effectively compared to a place like Legacy School or some of these some other entities within the community that either may be treated equally to you by the assessor's office or are not being treated equally under these circumstances, right?
Comparable in terms of what?
Being taxed or not being taxed.
My understanding of talking with Mr. Goodwillie is there's no residential homeschools that are exempt.
Okay, I guess my point is you alluded, okay. How many of them are out there? I mean, I'm looking for a number of people doing similar things to you.
I have no idea, sir. I can't speak to the homeschooling community. I just homeschool my children.
Okay.
I'm not a part of any association or any group that helps with homeschooling.
Okay, all right. Mr. Miller, thank you again.
It's Mr. Morris, but that's okay.
Mr. Morris, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But before I call on Commissioner Kavanaugh, Karen, do you want to restart? So Zoom, we had a problem with our Zoom, it froze. So we have to do the restart real fast.
That might take a minute, Mary Ann, if you want to, up to you.
It-
It's going to take a minute to come back up.
Okay, I just don't want people on Zoom to miss the conversation. Since it's a published meeting.
I'm getting there. Yeah.
Recording in progress.
Okay.
Hey, Leah, are you on there? If you are, can you unmute and tell me if you can hear okay?
I can hear you okay now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, so we'll go back, and in the queue is Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thanks for coming down.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Do you or your wife work outside the home?
I do, sir. She does not.
Okay, what do you do?
I work for 3 Electrical Engineering.
On the exemption application, you put down that you are the principal/teacher at Red Maple Academy.
I'm not authorized to teach them in any of the curriculum per her exemption from the commissioner. Due to COVID, we retracted our religious outgoings to the home. So those are the things that I take care of, which aren't part of the curriculum.
So is Red Maple Academy incorporated in Nebraska?
It's not incorporated, no, sir.
Okay. In the owner of record of this property, that'd be you and your wife?
Correct.
This is a very interesting case, and I want to thank you for taking the time to, bring it to us. Obviously, you know that it would affect a lot of other people besides you.
I understand that.
And
I'm not a trailblazer by any means. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel.
I appreciate that, but I mean, it's an interesting case, and I want to just say kudos to you and your wife for educating your children. That's a good thing.
Thank you.
I think we were all trying to do the best by our children, and you're doing what you think is right there. If I could ask Mr. Goodwillie a couple of quick questions. Thank you
Sure.
again. Mr. Goodwillie, I understand that this homeschool, unincorporated as it is, probably mirrors a lot of homeschools across the county. And from what your preliminary remarks said, it hasn't done what the Secretary of State would require it to do to qualify as a not-for-profit. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
There is no trace. There is no trace of either Red Maple Academy or Red Maple Elementary on the Secretary of State's website. Pardon me.
Right. And Mr. Morris and his wife are completely within their rights to call their operation whatever they want to call it.
Sure, they can call it anything they want, but what the law requires is that the property be owned by an organization which is an institution. The definition of educational organization is an institution. Give me a second. An institution operated exclusively for the purpose of offering regular courses of systematic instruction in academic, vocational, or technical subjects. To some degree, what I think the statute intends and is trying to say is that the formality of a nonprofit corporation, the formality of a more traditional school structure, is sort of an indicia of this kind of organization, that there's some reliability in this. And I think that's what they're aiming at. And by the way, and maybe I don't have all of the documents Mr. Morris handed out, I would like to point out this document from the State Commissioner of Education. It doesn't necessarily accredit or recognize Red Maple Elementary as a school. It simply acknowledges that Mr. Morris has opted out and is homeschooling. The Nebraska Department. So I want to correct that for the record.
Does the organization hold legal title of the building? No. He and his wife own the
One
legal
minute.
title. And we'll come back to this if we run out of time here. Does the organization hold equitable title on the land contract? No. Is the organization leasing the property? No. It's a single-family residence. And I'm interested in this because if this entity, or any entity so dedicated, would qualify by incorporating requires, could it conceivably qualify for a tax exempt? And we'll run out of time here, but that's the question I want to come back to you with, because there have to be hundreds, if not thousands, of homeschooled children in Douglas County. Mm-hmm. And so they're similarly situated to the Morris kids, I presume, at home, doing what the Morris kids are doing, being educated by somebody in their home. And if those people see what happens here in this test case, we'll
Time.
come back.
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Rogers?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
For me or Mr. Morris?
Mr. Moore. Thank you. So, sir, I'm just curious, how long have you all owned that home?
This will be our 7th year, I believe.
7th year. And it looks like from the list, your kids are 11 and
No, 5, 8, and 12.
5, 8, and 12. You bought it for 7 years. Were you all homeschooling before you bought that home?
Yes, sir.
In your
At
other
our
home?
previous residence.
Did you ask for this
No, we
exemption on
rented.
that? Okay. Is it used exclusively for education?
Well, and that's if I may, on the application, the very application, it says predominantly. So there's a slight distinction there. Like exclusively, to me, the layman, is far different than predominantly. So on the application, it says predominantly. I've done the math as far as how many hours a day my children sleep, how many hours a day they are in schooling, things of this nature. It does fall under the category of predominantly.
What are you noting that says predominantly?
The Board of Equalization, the meeting notes, says predominantly.
Okay, but the statute says exclusively, am I right?
Exactly.
If I may help a little, Commissioner, the courts have glossed exclusively to mean predominantly, and what they ask is, well, what's the predominant use of the parcel? They're not going to deny the exemption for a church because they play bingo in the basement one night a week.
Okay.
So ask yourself, with this dwelling, is the predominant use here educational, or do they live in it 24/7?
Okay,
If I may,
sure.
how is there any distinction from a boys' home or from a boarding school or things of this nature? The fact that my children sleep there should not be a disqualifying factor, because there is other case law, the President's House and the Doane College case. There's other exceptions that have been made just based on common sense. My children do need to sleep somewhere. So, I
You
mean,
don't think that's a stretch?
I don't. I mean, there's no stipulation in the law to dictate that specifically. And that's my only point. With the statute, you have to read it as it's read.
You mentioned okay, that's fair. And so you mentioned the term group when you got up before. Who are you defining as your group?
Well,
Because this is
the only reason
I'm interpreting your group by you including I'm assuming by you including the marriage piece in there about your wife. Are
Well-
you including you all in the group?
myself and my wife.
Yeah.
But the problem with this statute is before the statute, there's no definition box of what terms are going to be defined in the statute. There is those in the United States Code, CFR Code, things of that. There are definitions. So if there's no definitions labeled in here, it falls upon the person reading it based on their knowledge of the English language, of what those words mean. What I articulated there was group means 2 or more people. An organization is a coming together of those 2 people. It doesn't say anything in there that I have to have a license or be certified by the state or have tax exemption. It doesn't say that at all. We are an organization by the very definition of the term.
But are you including your wife and
Yes, sir.
yourself in the group? Okay.
My wife and I are an organization.
So if I was to think that there may be a mixing between, there seems like there's some mixing going on because your action as a school, you're including you and your wife in the group. I'm assuming you and your wife aren't going to school every day.
I provide the financial to support the school. She supplies all the teaching. I don't do
1
any
minute.
of the curriculum work.
Commissioner Kavanaugh mentioned that you are noted as the principal,
That's on the
Just-
application. That's and to be perfectly
but
honest,
you're not there during the day.
well, no, I'm not. I didn't
Okay.
do my due diligence. A lot of principals aren't there during the day either. They're in meetings or other things. I didn't do my due diligence as far as putting forth enough evidence with the initial application, and that's my fault. But upon revisiting it and preparing for this meeting, I guess did what I was supposed to do.
Thanks.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle?
So thanks for coming. I actually agree with Commissioner Kavanaugh on this. This is a very interesting precedent you could be setting. The only thing I have an issue with, to be honest with you, is just that word exclusively. And so I know that the definition can vary But when I look at the state statute, which is ultimately what we're responsible to follow, that's the one word that really makes all the difference in my opinion about what makes it difficult to accept this. Can you go over that again for me?
Yes, ma'am. Is there any entity that's tax exempt that is exclusive to what they are exempt for? Schools have sporting events, they have bake sales, they serve food, they have sleep-ins, they have other things. Other churches have bake sales, churches have dances, things of this nature that aren't intrinsically religious. They're just events that occur there. So I don't truly believe that any entity is exclusive. I think that's why they play a little bit with the wording as far as, and have gravitated more towards predominantly. I mean, I don't believe any entity is exclusive to any one thing or another.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Friend?
Mr. Morris, yeah, sorry I messed your name
That's all
up.
right.
I apologize. I got it right that time, I think.
Thank
The reason I asked from the outset about comparables is because I think you could probably appreciate this. The issue that we run into, at least I'm going to follow up a little bit in the direction that Commissioner Kavanaugh and Commissioner Boyle were going. The issue that this could cause, I'm just throwing this out, and I want you to respond to it, is that we have thousands of folks in Douglas County that are homeschooling their children. And I know some neighbors, other people involved in this. The issue that I have is not necessarily case law. Mr. Goodwillie laid out some circumstances where case law has already spoken to this stuff. What I'm more interested in is statutory law. And what I'm concerned about is if something like this were to actually happen, that those thousands of residents in Douglas County, past and present and future, it opens up an opportunity and sets a precedent that is going to create a real interesting scenario. Not necessarily bad, but very interesting. And interesting because of the exclusive nature that Commissioner Boyle laid out here. Statutory law lays out certain guidelines, and they're fairly high level. What I'm worried about is if something like this were to happen and you got this, you're going to have to lawyer up because things start getting interesting after that. Because it doesn't end here, and that's going to cost more money. So what I'm getting at is, as a property owner and as a guy who raised 4 kids, I made a choice to pay for a certain portion of their education. I had to do that because it was my wife and I's decision. If I stepped back and said, well, I'm going to do this here, it wouldn't have necessarily occurred to me to say I'm going to go out and seek that property tax exemption because there was no statutory precedent for me doing it. I knew I would have had to lawyer up. It would have cost me more money to actually pay lawyers 5 years down the road than it would to pay the property tax burden and say, I'm getting the value add that I originally sought after. You see where my train of thought is going? I'm worried about that. This is a precedent that is going to open up an opportunity for people, either good or bad, to actually say, we're wiping this slate clean. We're changing statutory law, and the county board essentially, and the Board of Equalization essentially did that. And that means you're on the hook for actually trying to defend that thought process. So the concern I have is, it sounds a little altruistic. I don't mean it to be totally that. The concern I have is, you're a pioneer here, and that could be costly, I think. So I want your opinion on that. I mean, have you thought about that a little bit, I guess?
Yeah, and I appreciate your fiscal concerns. I'm not concerned about it. The bottom line is if fiscal is on your mind, I'm saving the Omaha Public School District hundreds of thousands of dollars by homeschooling. If the fear of setting a precedent is going to disqualify me, I think that's a rather cowardly approach, and I'm not being disrespectful.
Sure, I understand.
But just because a precedent is going to be set, precedents get set all the time, and that's what institutes change. I'm not asking to change the law, sir. I'm reading the law as it's read and say that I fit into it seamlessly.
Yeah, and I didn't consider it, I didn't consider, the decision I make, you're not implying anything that wouldn't, that would offend me, and I hope it wouldn't offend other commissioners. All I'm saying is that case
1 minute.
law is one thing, and I don't feel like I'm inherently guided by case law. Statutory law is another thing. And if there's a, I don't think it's seamless. I think that it could be argued that I'm not a lawyer, but it could be argued that we are violating statutory law. I mean, Commissioner Boyle laid that out. If we are, somebody's going to get sued. And more than likely, that's going to cost money. I'm not worried about the income that the county gets. What I'm worried about are constituents that are homeschooling their children, and then suddenly they're out in front of the Board of Equalization, or they're out in front of the assessor's office going, hey, it's open season. Now it's our turn. If you don't think there's going to be ramifications for that, I think we're being fairly naive. My point is, this is pioneering, and it's very innovative, and I like it. I like it, but it's troublesome. Thank you.
Can I reply to that real quick? Okay.
Yeah.
If not.
Commissioner Morgan?
I'd make a motion that we follow the request of the assessor's office and deny this request.
Okay, Commissioner Garcia? Oh, that's what.
I'll go with the motion.
Okay, there was a motion by Commissioner Morgan and seconded by Commissioner Rogers. Commissioner Kavanaugh, you wanted to speak?
Yes, Mr. Goodwill, if you could. So, according to Mr. Morris, they're not incorporated. They don't have any type of a Red Maple Academy agreement with themselves to lease the property for purposes of the Red Maple Academy. They haven't purchased the property for Red Maple Academy. Red Maple Academy is just, I guess, a title that he and his wife have agreed to call their home school operation. My question is, if they were to incorporate, if they were to qualify with the Secretary of State as a not-for-profit Red Maple Academy, Inc., educational institution, if they were to have a board of directors who then engaged with the property owners themselves to lease from them the property for purposes of educating those children, and did the other things that a not-for-profit educational institution would do, is there a way that an individual couple could qualify their own home for tax exemption under the rubric of a homeschool academy?
It's a really interesting hypothetical question. I think what you might run into is the same sort of thing that the IRS does once in a while when somebody seeks a 501c3 certificate as a ministry, and the only people involved in the ministry are all from the same family. It creates a real specter of, I don't know, self-dealing is maybe not the word I want. Potentially that's a closer argument than what we have today, I think. Whether they could or they couldn't, I'd have to ponder a little bit. But if they paper it right, it's a stronger argument for sure. And I guess the next question is, which that would open the door to, is if you exempt it, they will come, is kind of a truism in this business. And I would just suggest that, yeah, I think others would want to walk through that door. I mean, factually, their situations may be similar to this or may be different, I don't know. And then what do you do with the religious people? Okay, I put a cross in every room in my house, and I pray 10 times a day, and so therefore I use my property for religious purposes. Religion is even squishier than education, you know, in terms of not wanting to dictate orthodoxy. So I don't know if we quite get there in your scenario, but it's a lot closer than this one is.
Thank you.
No other commissioner comments? I just want to say thank you, Mr. Morris. one of the things that I live by is to continue to learn, and you definitely have brought something forward in county government that has never been addressed before. And I think it's not the end of it. I think that we will continue to have to look at this. I think that, yes, there will be the if this happens, then this happens scenario. But again, I can't fault you for coming forward with a scenario that, again, has never been crossed, but needs to be looked at. And so, but with where we are today and what our interpretation as a Board of Equalization, I'm gathering from the board that we don't see you fitting into that block, if you will. And so I'm sure there's more work to be done and more questions to be answered. But again, I do appreciate you bringing this very interesting yet difficult as just a black and white answer to the Board of Equalization today.
Thank you.
So with that, there is a motion and a second. Is there anyone else wishing to comment on this? All right, please vote. It's to vote to agree with the assessors to deny the application.
Motion to uphold the denial passes. Commissioner Kavanaugh voting no, other commissioners voting yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay, all right. We'll clarify that for the record. So the motion passes 7-0. Commissioner Kavanaugh voting yes.
Again, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Morris,
you.
for being here today.
Thank you very much.
We do have the two other resolutions, E and F. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Friend to approve E and F and adjourn. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Commissioner Rogers. Motion passes 7-0.
Right. With that, we will move to the agenda for the Douglas County Board of Commissioners. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Boyle. Here. Commissioner Kavanaugh. Commissioner Friend.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Morgan. Here. Commissioner Rogers. Here. Madam Chair.
Present. Item A, approval of minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, March 22, 2020. And item B, approval of claims submitted for payment process through Tuesday, March 29, 2020. Is there a motion to approve A and B? Motion by Commissioner Morgan, second by Commissioner Rogers. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next is the consent agenda, items A through H. I am going to ask that we take F separately. So with that, the consent would be A through E, G, and H. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Morgan. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
We'll go back to item F, resolution to adopt the 2021 International Property Maintenance Code and amendments and rescind any current county standards in conflict with the 2021 IPMC and amendments. And here today is Dave Forrest from our Environmental Services. Good morning.
Good morning, Dave Forrest, Planning and Zoning Coordinator, Department of Environmental Services. Since 2021, the Planning Commission has been talking about adopting a standard for property maintenance for properties in Douglas County. Currently, we rely upon the nuisance regulations, which were adopted in 2001 by the Douglas County Commissioners. Those regulations really have more to do with the Department of Health than they do regarding the condition of buildings. And we're suggesting, and after lengthy conversations with the Planning Commission, we are requesting that the county commissioners adopt the 2021 property maintenance code along with amendments. The Planning Commission recommended some amendments to take into account the rural nature of Douglas County. The fact that a number of properties are agricultural, they have agricultural purposes, they're not necessarily going to come in contact with the public on a day-to-day basis. And so we did that. So I prepared a packet of materials for you, including a cover memo, a copy of the nuisance regulations, a link to the 2021 ICC property maintenance code, and a couple of other codes or standards. They're not codes. There is a standard that we had on our website for dangerous properties and condemnations that it's unclear what the origin of that standard is, but those can easily be adopted or incorporated. Those are easily incorporated in the property maintenance code. The ICC property maintenance code, International Code Council, is a national standard. You've already adopted the ICC building code and the ICC residential code. That's for new construction. The property maintenance code governs how do we regulate existing structures so that they don't become dilapidated and create a hazard for the community. We think we need a better standard. The ICC property maintenance code provides that standard. It's the same standard that the city of Omaha has adopted, and with the fact that we've made accommodations for the rural nature of western Douglas County, we feel this is the right direction to go. So it's on your agenda today for approval, but I can certainly answer any questions, and we can certainly follow up with discussions if you don't want to take action today.
Are there any questions, Commissioner Morgan?
Hey, thank you very much. I'm just wondering what this, we're rescinding some of that code and then adding the new 2021. Give us some examples of what might take place or some reasons for this.
What would we do with this?
Right. Well, how it's going to affect people.
We currently have some properties in western Douglas County that are in violation of even the nuisance code.
Did what?
We have some properties in western Douglas County that do not meet adequate property maintenance standards, either under the nuisance regulations, which you've had, or under the property maintenance code. And we need to take some action on those following neighbor complaints over the past several years. We haven't taken any action, and we'd like to take some action on those properties in response to neighbor complaints, but we don't feel that we have the best tool in the nuisance regulations to do that. We'd like to take action under the International Property Maintenance Code rather than the nuisance regulations.
So might those examples be that somebody has 4 vehicles parked in their front yard or something of that nature?
That's certainly.
You feel like you can't really provide a reason to change that if I'm in violation under your current code, and the new code of 2021 will help you to be able to have me remove those items from my yard or whatever.
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us of this change? Is this something other counties are doing and starting to change?
I don't know if it's something other counties are doing, but the International Property Maintenance Code is the national standard.
Has the city done something adopting that same code already too?
They have the International Property Maintenance Code, and they enforce that. I think they're on the 2018.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Friend?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave, years ago, it seems like a previous life now, I helped, when I was on the Urban Affairs Committee, I helped push, I think it was 2005, the ICC standards through the legislative process to get the builders on board and the state of Nebraska on board to actually bring those regulations up to date. One of the things that I noticed at that time is we had MOBA, we had the Nebraska Builders, I never really cared tremendous amount about what lobbyists told me. I look at Commissioner Kavanaugh when I say that. But I did take heed, and the interesting part about that when we were doing that is that we got tons of backlash. I had 12, 14 people in a room. It took us months to get that thing across the finish line, and part of it was because of the regulatory requirements that the ICC leveled on these guys, and they knew it, these folks, and they knew it was coming. So there were enhancements that we could make. My question for you is, not a lot of people know every Tuesday that this is going on. And the other thing is, the type of people that would have to contractually have to handle maintenance codes are the type of people that don't have lobbies. So they're out there and suddenly they realize that there's a change in standards and they're like, who approved this? And by the way, it's going to cost me a tremendous amount of money. So what I'm getting at is, have you gotten much feedback yet when you said, hey, we're going to, or not you, but when we all said, hey, this is going to move forward, we've got to come up to speed, right? That's my question. Has there been any backlash? Are people saying, no, this?
No, but I'm not sure that people are aware that we're doing this.
Right. That's kind of what I was worried about,
right.
I guess. Okay, well, okay, I'm probably worrying, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the properties that I have in mind are really beyond the pale.
Right.
And so I'm not sure that these property owners could reasonably expect that no action would ever be taken against their property for property maintenance. All I'm doing is saying that all I'm trying to do is use a better tool than the county nuisance regulations, which really are more geared towards the Department of Health than they are towards buildings.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Any other questions or comments? You said that this went to the planning board, right?
Yes, we started discussing this in 2021.
Right.
And after discussions, we adopted, or we didn't adopt, they recommended adoption at their March meeting, along with amendments to take into account, rural Douglas County, the fact that we have agricultural buildings, which may have peeling paint and a lot of other things that we don't necessarily want to be enforcing the same standards on those types of buildings as we do in maybe a residential setting, because we certainly have residential neighborhoods, the same kind of residential neighborhoods as there are in the city of Omaha, but we don't have the same standard that the city of Omaha has to enforce property maintenance.
So right now, these properties that you're concerned about, that you're getting calls on, what happens? What's the process now?
Well, if this board adopts the 2021 property maintenance code, then
No, what happens now?
What happens now?
Yeah.
And nothing's happening right now.
So you get a complaint and you just say we have nothing that we can do about it?
Well, this goes back before my time. And that's not an excuse for the fact that I've been here for over a year now. but
Yep, your time here, that's it.
We have
past that.
We've developed a notice of violation and developed an enforcement process, because this really I don't think this has really happened a whole lot in Western Douglas County. This type of thing. This is more of an urban issue.
Right.
Property maintenance. The city of Omaha does this kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
And it hasn't really been going on in Western Douglas County. So we needed to kind of figure out what the process would be. So we've got our enforcement notice of violation, we've got our process, we know where this is going to go legally, and now we want to put in place the standards to govern what we're doing. So this is the culmination of what we've been working on. And it's all in your hands.
But my point is that for now, there is a process that we use. There's just not, quote, a standard that we have on paper that backs that up?
I would say the standard is unclear. For instance, under the nuisance regulations, due processes would start with the director of the Department of Health calling a hearing in
Right.
response to this, which makes no sense at all,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
that just doesn't make any sense at all. And then just to follow up, as I said, we have this dangerous building procedure, I'll just call it that, and a condemnation procedure. It's not clear that that was ever adopted by the county board. So I think what we need is a standard that is clear, comprehensive, recognized by other jurisdictions, and adopted by this board, so we're all on the same page.
And I'm just about out of time, but I have concerns that we're moving on something that, again, will affect those that we represent. Not maybe in a negative manner, but it'll affect them because we don't have this in place right now, and we really haven't had kind of an historical, other than what you're just telling us. And I'm a little bit uncertain yet if I agree or disagree yet, because there's too much history that I would like to hear about. So I'm going to ask that we lay this over. I don't think it's anything real emergent that we have to talk about, but that I would ask that in a committee process, you come and kind of talk a little bit more in depth of this. Again, because if we're going to make regulations and changes and policy changes, I think that we as the policymakers just I need to be a little bit more comfortable in doing that.
Sure, I
Okay.
understand.
Yeah. Commissioner Morgan?
I agree with our chairperson that would be good, and I think.
Commissioner Morgan, hold,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, your mic's not on.
I was just
Be
trying
mad to help.
Our chairperson, and what I'd like to do is suggest maybe you send us some of the changes
There we go.
that this is making.
Right.
And then we give that consideration at that committee meeting or whatever.
Right.
So I'd make the motion
To lay
at
it
this
over.
time to lay it over, and I would assume it would almost be, we have a meeting next week, and then we have meetings for the next 2 weeks, and then we don't. So you can kind of change that and put it on the agenda when you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, okay.
So-
What,
So I would just urge you to take a look of what was included in your meeting packet. So there's a cover memo from me. There's a link to the International Property Maintenance Code. There's a copy of the nuisance regulations. There's a copy of the dangerous property procedure and the condemnation procedure. And I'm very happy to come and talk about it. But you should have some materials there that you can look over.
right, and we do, but
Yeah.
my point is that sometimes it's easier to have a conversation
Sure.
about something than just read it. And there's, again, you may not be the one, again, because you've been only here a year, but there are people in the department that would be able to add that historical perspective for us. And again,
Understood.
just because we're making policy, I
No,
wanted to
understood.
make sure.
I just wanted to respond to Mr. Morgan that
Right,
Yeah,
I see
it's
that.
in there.
hopefully you've got everything you
Oh,
need
yeah.
Yeah,
there.
Yep.
yes.
Any other questions, Commissioner Boyle?
Yeah, just another comment too. I actually think it's a good idea to do things like this, and like Mr. Forrest, I've been here a year, but at the same time, I feel like if we can make things consistent, and if other jurisdictions are already following this, it sounds like it's what in medicine we would call the standard of care. So I don't necessarily feel the need to reconsider it, but that's my 2 cents. I think that what we're doing really is just finding some solid regulations that are already out there, and we're just trying to be consistent. And really, I see it as we're kind of bringing up our game to be where it should be. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll just work with you to
Thank you.
get it back on the agenda then, but there was a motion and a second, right?
I didn't pick up on the second, Madam Chair. I know Commissioner Morgan made the motion. So go get Commissioner Rogers. made the second.
Okay, Larry?
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue. 68132. I'm amazed, really amazed. We're sitting here talking about international rules, international standards. This is the United States of America. We're not subservient to any other country or international body. I'm listening to this and I wonder, oh boy, if I have an inspector out to my house, they may shut me down and lock me up, dangle house arrest at me if I'm nice and I obey. But they may declare my house, my property blighted or severely blighted because it doesn't meet some of these standards. They're not my standards. They're not necessarily your standards. They're somebody else's standards. I think you should rescind this, not even reconsider it, and get out of the international business and represent the citizens of this county. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, please vote.
Motion to lay over passes. Commissioner Boyle voting no, other commissioners voting yes.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I'll get with you. Citizen comments. Is there anyone in the chamber wishing to speak to the board about an item not on the agenda?
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. I guess I'm glad I don't hold office because it's a whole lot easier to shoot your mouth off and not be held accountable, except at home maybe. But page 4 of the state constitution, paragraph 1-19, the right of peaceable assembly and to petition their government shall never be abridged. That's a very short paragraph, but I think the word abridged needs to be discussed in these chambers because the rules sometimes, if you're lucky, you get 5 minutes, if at all, and you may or may not get interrupted or cut off or escorted out. That seems like that's abridging your rights to petition your government to me. But anyway, on with more important things in the forest. I've talked about Marxism and critical race theory. These are not my words. These are words of a very renowned and astute lawyer, scholar, and author. And I'd like to read some of it. American Marxism has made great progress toward instituting its goals over the last several years. If it is to be defeated, as it must, albeit a daunting and complex mission, its existence must first be acknowledged and labeled for what it is. The urgency of the moment must be realized, and the emergency of a united patriotic front, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How true those words are. It's all over our city, all over our nation. And I'm sorry, but the people that believe in Black Lives Matter should reconsider their stance, because Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. If they don't want to be associated with that, then they should get out of that group or change their name. Let me give you an example. Right here in River City, back in I think it's December 2021 issue of, National Criminal Justice Review, another national body telling us what to do. A town hall organized by Mr. Preston Love, sitting with Black Lives Matters. And they're writing about these things such as criminal justice and things that are really Marxist tactics. You can read about that in here. The other thing is some of the tactics of the critical race theory. There are other renowned organizations, newspapers, and community columnists that disagree with a lot of the stuff we've heard here in the last couple of years. Epic Times is one of those. They wrote about why the founders couldn't abolish slavery. Another time they wrote about the 3/5 compromise was not based on racism and explained why. I was reading a book last night on the early history of our colonies, and about the time that George Washington was fighting the French and Indians before he was a renowned politician. There were at least 5,000 slaves in our country, but we didn't bring them over. That 5 minutes is gone already. Wow. Okay, anyway. There is another book called Frederick Douglass versus Karl Marx. We should probably all read some of that, but I'd like to present something to you for the record. And then I'm done. It's called No, the Constitution is Not Racist. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the Board of Commissioners about an item not on the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to a presentation. Our presentation on our Douglas County Youth Center 2021 data and updates on the Douglas County Juvenile Justice Initiative. Commissioner Chris Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Abby's going to come up and, as I said, just really give us, this is served kind of as a yearly update on some numbers and an update on where we are in the first quarter of 2022. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim and Abby.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dr. Abby Carbaugh, Douglas County Juvenile Justice Initiative. So I'm here today to give you an update on our Douglas County Youth Center and the population through the end of calendar year 2021. So this first graphic just shows us what our overall population trends have done for the last 3 years. So you can see since 2019, we've had a pretty steady downward decrease in the population. So we were at 79 in 2019, and we wound up the calendar year at an average of 56 youth in detention each day. The majority of that reduction came from the boys that we have in detention. The number of girls has remained pretty consistent. And this is that same information just split out by month. So you can see some of the monthly trends. We tend to be a little bit lower in our population numbers in the spring and then early fall, and then kind of have a little bit of a peak in November and December. This is the population split out by court type. So about 2/3 of the population in detention is awaiting charges in juvenile court, and about 1/3 has charges pending in adult court. So this is a graphic of our admissions. When we talk about average daily population, what we're talking about is really a function of both our admissions and then the length of stay for our population. So I'm going to kind of dive into both of those two groups. So if we start with admissions, we've been on a really steady downward decrease since about 2007. And we wound up 2021 as having 606 total admissions. So really, if we look at the last 5 years, we've seen a significant decrease and almost about halved our number of admissions since 2016. And this does include an average of about 21 youth we have admitted each year who are being held for other counties or other law enforcement agencies and who aren't necessarily pending charges within Douglas County. This breaks it out by the type of court. So again, we have predominantly admissions for youth pending charges in juvenile court, with about just under 100 pending charges in adult court. And most of the youth who we get in, if we look at just those youth with charges in juvenile court, many are in a pre-adjudication status. So this is based on the information that we have from within the DCYC case management system. So there are about 150 youth last year who came in with charges who we know were already on probation. The rest had picked, the pre-adjudication population is pending new charges. They may or may not be on probation, but we do know that 150 for sure were. When we look at that technical violation group, we've seen a significant decrease since 2014. And when we look at the charges, why they're coming back on technical violations, it's predominantly for unlawful absences. There are some failures to appear, and then violations of their conditions of either probation supervision or our home program. Youth admitted for new charges, we had about 300 last year. When we look at those types of offenses, we're looking primarily at theft and assaults, although we do have possession of drugs and possession of weapons as sort of the high contributing factors also. Our adult court admissions, you can see, are significantly lower than the number of youth we have coming in on juvenile court charges. When youth are charged in adult court, what we see most often is weapons offenses, weapons use, and weapons possession. In 2021, we did have a pretty large number of youth for our system admitted on charges related to homicide. At least for 2021, the majority of those were very specifically targeted events, retaliatory events. So we can kind of look at where those specific events are coming from and trace them back to their origins. Looking at the age of the population, we're really looking at youth in that 15, 16, 17-year-old range. That accounts for about 3/4 of juvenile court admissions and about 80% of our adult court admissions. And then again, as we've seen before, we are predominantly non-white in our population there. A lot of youth of color. It's again about 75% of the youth admitted in juvenile court are youth of color, and about 85% of the youth admitted to on adult court charges. And then looking at admissions by zip code, this graphic just shows over the last 15 years our juvenile detention population comes from areas that are predominantly in the eastern half of Douglas County. 68104 and 68111 account for, I wanted to say, about 1/3 of admissions, and then 68107 is sort of the next most dense zip code. And then when we look at just the snapshot population that we had last week, we see those same trends. So the majority of our DCYC population is from East Omaha, or eastern Douglas County, with concentrations in those 3 zip codes. So now just turning it over to length of stay, seeing how long youth are with us. For youth with juvenile court charges, it's a little bit over a month. We ended 2021 for the youth who were released. They stayed about 41 days for charges pending in juvenile court. And then for those with charges in adult court, we were at 124 days, or about 4 months. So we did have that peak in 2020 for the adult court youth. That is primarily due to the fact that the adult courts were not processing cases, and so we just had a little bit of a stacking and sort of buildup effect. And then once the courts resumed in session, we see that number coming back down. This is a new slide for this presentation. So this is looking at the average length of stay, and then we've broken it out by the jurisdiction. So you can see those blue bars up front for the last 4 years. This is the length of stay for youth admitted on adult court charges. And then the yellow and gray bars, we've broken out that juvenile court population into those youth who are in a pre-adjudication status and those who are already on probation. So those 2 groups have pretty comparable lengths of stay. Again, we're in that kind of 40 to 45 day period length of stay there. But when we can see a difference is when we break it out by their state ward status. So if we look at youth who are state wards, so they're dually involved in the child welfare and the juvenile justice system, we see that they're staying about 1.5 times as long as youth who are not involved in the child welfare system. So we know that if youth are involved in both systems, they necessarily have more complex cases. There's a higher degree of need going on with those youth. So it makes sense that they would remain in detention a little bit longer while other alternatives are being addressed or being found for them. But this might be a group that we want to take a deeper dive into in the future to see what are some of the processes around it, and is there any way that we can help speed up the length of stay for those youth so they're not remaining in a detention environment for quite as long. So then the next few slides are going to get into some of the grants and programs that we have going on within the Youth Center and our Juvenile Justice Initiative to help address some of the length of stay issues, the racial and ethnic disparity issues, and things that we're facing. So the first one is our OJJDP Title II Racial and Ethnic Disparity Grants. We have 2 grants that are ongoing right now. The first one is the one we received in 2018, so we are in the last year of that grant right now. And the funds from that program are being used to implement stability services for youth on our home program. So these are youth who are in a pre-adjudication status, and they're being released from detention on electronic monitoring equipment and having that supervision in the community so they don't have to be in detention. We also received the 2021 Title II grant this year. This is a grant for 3 years. It's $980,000 that will be used to provide programs and services that directly target some of the racial and ethnic disparities in our community and provide some culturally informed and culturally sensitive programming to youth in the community and in our detention environment. So we are in the process of setting up an RFP process, or request for proposal, to get funders so we can review what initiatives are out there and select which providers would meet the needs of our population the best. And we expect that to begin in the next 90 days. We're still waiting for the federal government to release the funds for that grant. The next one we have is a BJA grant. This is the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Grant. This is another 3-year grant with about $420,000, and we are using that to increase the treatment capacity within DCYC. We are hiring a full-time licensed mental health professional, so we have the ability to provide more sort of in-house mental behavioral health services to our youth. And then we are supporting positive youth development by incorporating some life skills training and also the use of virtual reality within the therapeutic context to help youth internalize some de-escalation techniques and practice what they're learning in their behavioral and mental health treatments in a controlled environment so that once they're released back into the community, they have that foundation to work with. We also have the OJJDP 2021 Comprehensive Youth Violence Prevention and Reduction Program. This is another 3-year grant, $905,000 to develop programs for youth gang and gun violence intervention services. So with this grant, we are partnering with a community provider who will provide credible messengers directly out onto the streets and to the youth working within DCYC, so to get some of that violence interruption strategies in place. This grant also provides funding to work with middle school, high-risk middle school students to start developing some of those relationships and getting some of those, the violence interruption strategies in place earlier and within the school system. And then also using the Phoenix curriculum with the youth in DCYC and in the community, which is a targeted gang intervention program. And then we are continuing with the 2020 OJJDP Reducing the Use of Isolation in Youth Detention Facilities grant. This is a 3-year grant to address the use of room confinement within DCYC. So developing strategies, policies, procedures for how we can reduce the use of room confinement within detention, providing training to staff in motivational interviewing and also target. These are behavioral management programs and communication programs so we can develop that rapport with youth and help build some of that social support network for them while they're detained. And then there is an external evaluation component with this grant. So that is looking at how well we're doing, are we putting the things that we said we were going to do into place, and then also what are our plans for stability and sustainability once the funds from this grant are used up. And then the last 2 we have the Behavioral Health Initiative. This is 2-year funding. It provides a weekly multidisciplinary team meeting for youth who are in detention. This is a collaborative group with representatives from UNMC, CHI, Charles Drew Health Center, Probation, Health and Human Services, and DCYC. And they meet to review all newly admitted youth to see if there are any significant issues that these youth are presenting with that need to be addressed while they're in detention. They also review youth with high mental behavioral health needs and with court-ordered evaluations to make sure that we can get youth to the providers who can assess them and address any outstanding needs that they may have. And then we also manage the Nebraska 2022-2023 Community-Based Grant AIDS Funds. This is from the Nebraska Crime Commission. And we have over $1.3 million that we allocate across 13 community providers to provide early intervention services. And again, this is just to help decrease the involvement of youth across the juvenile court system and to provide services in those highest needs areas of our community. So that's what we've got going on.
I didn't know if, Kim, you wanted to add anything at this time? Okay. Any questions from commissioners on the presentation? Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Thanks for this. On page 12, where you go into the race and ethnicity of kids incarcerated, it would be helpful if we could have a percentage breakout like you do on the demographic of Douglas County's population on the left there.
Sure.
For these graphs, which are bar graphs and do not indicate exact percentages. However, I think you mentioned the overall percentage of minority representation in incarcerated youth, and it was what?
Yes, it was about 3/4 for the youth in juvenile court, or 75% of the youth are youth of color, and then 85% of the youth in adult court are youth of color.
85?
Correct.
Okay, so overwhelmingly minority kids involved with incarceration.
Yes.
In a county that has about a 27% minority population?
Yes.
Why the huge disparity?
You know, I think that's something that we need to look further into. We do have, so DCYC, we're not able to control who comes in the front door, but we do have the JDAI committee looking at some of those issues, working with the case processing group and a racial ethnic disparities group. And I know they're getting information from the courts and county attorney's office and police department just to try to get a look at what's happening on the front end that is resulting in this disparity on the back end.
And you go back a couple of years here, but this seems to have been the case for a very long time.
Yes, this is not a new trend.
Okay. And so we're just looking at it?
Looking at it to figure out why it's happening. Like I said, we have some of the new initiatives, some of the new grant funds that we have in place, or we'll be putting into place to address these issues. So if we can figure out what's happening and why it's happening, then we can make sure that we're tailoring services and programs in the community to address it.
So some of these grants have been running for the same period of time that you indicate here, 2019, 2020, 2021. All of them, pretty much, right?
Correct.
They seem to have had no impact on these numbers.
Oh, no, I apologize. The grants that I discussed, we have, most of those are new grants that we received that will be, the funds will be released this year.
New in 2022?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Maureen Boyle?
Thanks, Dr. Carbod. Just a couple things, just for my education too. When you talked about 40 days is how long the youth are in there with technical charges. Can you just allude to that a little bit and explain why can't we like shorten the number of days that they're retained for that? It was page 8.
Maybe. Let me see. Well, so I think, I apologize. I think that's another thing that we're just working towards is to try to figure out what we can do with that length of stay.
Yeah, it's gone down dramatically, but I don't know if it's still 30, 40 days sounds like a long time if it's, quote, technical charges.
Yes.
I thought it was page 8.
Kim Havacati, Deputy County Administrator. I'll try to answer that one. Yes, the length of stay is one of the main issues we've really been working on. We know in the adult arena, the length of stay has been extremely long, especially during COVID. That is coming back down. Most of our adult charged youth are there from 6 to 9 months. We have one youth that's been there a year and a half that we need to work with, the court system. In the juvenile area on the length of stay, again, it is all judicial driven. So the judge orders the youth into detention, the judge orders the release from detention. We are working with the judicial branch. That's why we created the stability services for the home program, because what the judges were saying, we need more than an electronic monitor to keep the community safe and the youth safe to let them out on the home program. So now we have the stability services and the judges are starting to use that more and more. I think, Commissioner, it's just going to be some time before more access to those services occur. We are not like many states that limit the time period a juvenile can be in detention. Most states say 15 days in their out period. We do not have that here, so it is a judge-based decision.
I see. Okay. And then actually along those lines, and it can be either one of you could answer. It had to do with the home program. I was wondering if there's any data on recidivism rates on those who are part of or participate in that.
We are just working on that data. We'll gladly do a presentation on the home program. The stability services really started, Commissioner, in the last probably 4 to 5 months. So we were trying to wait until the summer to give a more larger report out on the home program, because then we would have had the stability services and compared it to pre-stability services with the home program and what were violations looking like, compared to now with the stability services, were we able to maintain it better. So if you want something now, we can gladly get it for you, Commissioner. Otherwise, that's what our plan was.
No, I was just kind of curious more than anything. I look forward to hearing a presentation regarding that. And then the other component is these youth that are wards of the state. It sounds like that's particularly challenging. So I guess not really a question, but more I want to make sure there's reassurance that these kids specifically are really getting the help that they need, because of course they've got all kinds of other social determinants of how successful they'll be in their lives just based on being wards of the state in the first place.
We had a meeting recently with the Health and Human Services, with probation, and with the county to work specifically on this population. A process has been developed now where probation and HHS are looking at these youth every other week to help determine. Most of them are there waiting for some higher level of placement that right now is extremely difficult to find because of their high mental health needs. But we do have those processes now set up to really look at that population. I think from HHS standpoint, the good news is that they've also included Dr. Fromm, who is their psychiatrist for HHS, that is going to be going to our MDT meetings every week, and also looking at these youth so we can figure out what their mental behavioral health needs are.
Very good. Good. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia?
Appreciate the information today. Just had a couple quick follow-ups. Specifically on page 22, the community-based grant kind of pot that goes to entities in the community to address these issues that we're talking about today. Now I'm trying to learn, as a newer commissioner, the process that we have here locally. I was involved in the community-based grant process in Lancaster County when I ran an agency down there for juvenile justice services. So trying to catch up and learn about the process here. So if you could kind of describe to me the process in which those entities and projects are determined for that $1.3 million pot, and maybe a few examples of some of the agencies in recent history that have received those funds, and what kind of evaluation requirements are required in relation to those programs, just to assess kind of not just outputs, but outcomes and results, to kind of see what programs are indeed being most effective from those initiatives, and especially to address the DMC and RED issues that have been going on.
Sure, Commissioner. So as Dr. Caldwell stated, this is through the Nebraska Crime Commission. Mm-hmm. Our process here in Douglas County, I can send you a very detailed guidelines and standards that we use, but this now is a 2-year grant, the community-based grant fund aid. It runs with the state's grant fund. We have open application process. We then, after all the applications are in, we have a 7-person advisory committee where each one of the commissioners appoints somebody to that advisory group to actually read all the grants, to then score the grants. They meet. They then make recommendations to the Juvenile Justice Stewardship Group, which then reviews their recommendations. That group then makes their recommendations to the county board, and the county board has final approval on our CBA grant funds. For instance, some of the agencies that are funded is the Center for Holistic Development in North Omaha, Urban League in North Omaha that's working on truancy issues, the Latino Center of the Midlands that's working on truancy issues in South Omaha in specific schools, Lift Together, which also is another truancy initiative in South Omaha. We have mediation services. We've tried to target exactly what our community needs are. When you asked about the evaluation process, I'd love to say it's good, and I can't. stand here and say that. Under Nebraska statutes, it's directed that the Juvenile Justice Institute is the entity responsible for collecting the data and then giving each of the counties outcomes on the success of their programs. And we've had a lot of discussions at the state level saying we need more information on the successfulness of our programs. The data is owned by the state, so we're working on that one, Commissioner.
Interesting. Okay. I'd love to learn more about that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Friend?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kim. Hey, this might not be the purview, at least for a report like this, but I was just a little curious. On pages 18 and 19, you kind of give a rundown of the grants and programs, and then, of course, on 20 and 21. And I always say this, we can take this offline and talk a little bit about it because I can get more background. But are there programs in place? Many of these youth are victims of crime as well, not just the ones we have detained, but ones that we haven't detained yet or put on that haven't been adjudicated. They're victims too. And I know we've got some partnerships and programs in place to deal with victims of crime. What I know is what the Douglas County Attorney's Office does, what the police department does, the state of Nebraska does. Are there, and those are governmental subdivisions, do some of them, crime commissions, stuff like that. The Child Advocacy Center, the Friendship Home, legal aid. Is there a report that we can include, and maybe again we could talk about it offline, that would indicate that there's some metrics about who these people are helping? So in other words, later on we have some ARPA funding for legal aid. I would love to see how some of our youth who are being victimized are being helped by these organizations and what those metrics look like. But again, we can take those offline. I don't have a lot of that information, I guess, and I can talk to other commissioners about it as well.
Commissioner, more than willing to work with you on that. And yes, a lot of our, especially our community-based grant funding, for instance, goes to Missing Runaway Youth Initiative, which is through Project Harmony. We're trying to get at these youth sooner that are victims of the adults in their life, so we're trying to get to it sooner. But yes, we can gladly work with you on that.
I don't want to add more to the plate. We could talk about it again offline.
But I think many of our programs and services do work both with the instigator, but also with the victims of it, because we need to do both, because we know the strong correlation in the juvenile arena.
Thank you, Kim.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Kim or Abby, I want to thank for this report. I think it shows great progress, but also shows where we need to focus our work. One of the things that when we start talking about the disproportionality of kids in our justice system, and then you correlate that to where the kids are coming from, what zip codes are coming from, and then, of course, looking at arrest data, where and what are happening in those zip codes. That kind of explains why our numbers are what they are, but what it does then do is tell us what services, as you said, Kim, we're focusing on now in the community with community providers to address more of the issues than just the action the youth took. So what I mean by that is a child could commit a crime and all we look at is the crime. But what we really need to look at is the environment to which that the children come from, and what can we do to work with our community partners to address some of those. It goes back to, the whole social determinant of health conversation that we've had. But it's the poverty, it's the violence, it's the housing, education. Those are the things that I think now we have been able, and I don't want to say successfully, but we've been able to, again, take our population and narrow it down to where we really need to focus those programs and services. And we can go back that many years, and that data really doesn't change a whole lot. The numbers were bigger, but now we're getting to where we're having kids in the youth center that truly need to be in the youth center, but then it's also telling us those other issues we need to address. And I think some of these grant opportunities that we have now are going to lead us to be able to do those service and programs more focused in those zip code and down into the community area. So I think we're on the right path. And again, just looking at the downward trend that you've been able to display on your charts, that's good. That's good progress. And again, we don't just stop. We continue to work on that progress. So again, I thank you for the information. And again, I think I'll be looking forward to those program updates once we see a little bit more data on them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Larry?
Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. Very nice presentation. I realize that those ladies are basically employees. But I want to point out something about the insidiousness of critical race theory. If those of us that are somewhat informed about it and national topics read the words on these charts and think about what critical race theory has been told to us that it's about, you can see the words that are being used are repetitively used, not only in your resolutions, but in your presentations. Words such as racial, ethnic, diversity, social justice, criminal justice, reform, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all buzzwords that are repeated often enough, as Hitler said, or his propagandists, that people will believe it. So I want to say today, and there is a member that's in the background. I might use his name, I might not. But he always said, we will have that discussion, but we never did because there was never a two-way discussion. It was all from that side. But I want people to think about this. I may have some Indian blood. I may have a little bit of black blood. But this critical race theory and these Marxists are pitting me against you, all of us against each other. And that's what Marxism does. It will destroy our society. They are trying to destroy our culture. And it's coming rather fast. And now we got a war going on. The main thing about the Marxism that I want to finally say is when black people and disadvantaged, whatever you want to refer to them as, realize that maybe they are one of those, quote, useful idiots of the Marxists because you're using their language, you're using their tactics to split up this country right here in River City. Do you not think they're going to be mad? Who do you think they'll take it on then? Who will they blame? But even right here, ladies and gentlemen, you're talking grants, so extend the words to, reparations. This is all in the background of everything that's been going on for the last 3 or 4 years in our resolutions, and it needs to be stopped. Write it differently. Say it differently. And don't accuse me all the time of being still racist and guilty of those in the past. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Rogers?
Okay, I can talk now, but I'm gonna be brief. Just for the public, that statement in itself is just propaganda. That's one of the most uninformed, almost asinine statements that I've heard in regards to that. And don't need to come up because you've had your time. I would just say to the public, that's like not what CRT is. Everything that has to do with color is not CRT. That is it's like asinine propaganda that's almost on the basis of indoctrination. So I just want to say that for the record.
Any other questions or comments? Again, thank you, Abby and Kim, for, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Kavanaugh.
So I thought our rules permitted us responding to public comments, but apparently they don't. So a couple of things. The characterization repeatedly of domestic groups as being Marxist is simply inaccurate. What I fail to hear is the characterization of the brutal war crimes being committed in the Ukraine by the Russian President Putin, who is an unreconstructed Marxist. I never hear any criticism of Putin, a former KGB agent, and an unreconstructed Marxist, but I hear all kinds of accusations unfounded by fact of domestic organizations as being Marxist. It's just an observation that there's kind of a double standard a little bit. I do, however, defend our public's right to come and say whatever they want to us in this forum. I may disagree with you, but I would defend your right to say this without being insulted and called asinine by public officials, officials that you pay to serve you. So while I recognize that what you say isn't necessarily factually correct, and it totally misses the fact that we're engaged right now in an aggressive war by an unreconstructed Marxist named Vladimir Putin, who you never criticize, and the fact that you do criticize incorrectly groups in our country who are simply trying to achieve equality and justice. I still respect your opinion and your right to express your opinion as guaranteed by the Constitution. So, thank you.
And I would just like to remind everyone for the rules. During citizen comments, we do not comment back. But citizens have the right, and they've shown it, and they've exercised it, to come for each agenda item and comment as they see fit. And each commissioner has 2 5-minute times that they can respond to that particular agenda item. So again, we have rules. With that, we'll move to committee reports, the first being the Budget Committee report as presented. Then we have a monthly fee report from the county clerk as presented for December 2021 and December 20. And then we have 2 ARPA investments. The first is the approval of a resolution authorizing the award of $1 million to the Yates Illuminates project to help fund renovation of the project site, along with providing the social and mental health services geared towards immigrant and refugee members of the community. This is coming out of Commissioner Garcia's allocation to invest in the Yates Illuminates project. Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do also have some co-sponsoring commissioners that have also supported the project, so I just want to recognize their support of the initiative as well, from Commissioners Rogers, Morgan, Kavanaugh, and Boyle, coming together to collaborate on supporting Yates Illuminates. This project and the ones that are coming up on the agenda have been talked about extensively at the ARPA committee, so I won't be too long here, but as mentioned, this project will bring together a collaborative of many nonprofits and community residents seeking to help our immigrant and refugee populations with mental health services, employment assistance, adult education, social services, and there's even some arts involved in there as well. The proposal lists very specifically the qualified census tracts that will be supported, which is favored by ARPA, and the logic model attached is also very specific on how the services by Yates Illuminates tie into ARPA provisions to support the community during this pandemic. So very awesome project. I know we have some reps on Zoom, though I'll defer to the potential for any questions from commissioners for this project.
All right, anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Is there, do we have a motion to approve? Is there a second? Motion by Commissioner Rogers, second by Commissioner Kavanaugh. Doug? Good morning.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay.
There it is.
Good morning, Doug Kagan, speaking for Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom. Our taxpayer group strongly opposes this $1 million ARPA funding for the Yates Illuminates project. However, meaning magnanimous in its intention, from our research and inquiries, it appears that some of this federal tax money will go to illegal aliens. It seems that commissioners are poised to dispense this money in a very inappropriate manner. The generous array of services provided includes English language services with translators, welfare services, job training, educational aid, tutoring, child care, career exploration, college assistance, and behavioral and mental health services with trauma therapy. Also, free food and clothes, culinary assistance, rent subsidies, home furnishings, credit assistance, loans, legal services, and advocacy, and senior care. Commissioners would give preference to non-citizens over lawful Nebraska citizens by this vote, with services not offered for free for most working Nebraskans. Commissioners should earmark these federal dollars instead to assist and compensate medical and health professionals who continue to suffer stress and burnout from the COVID-19 pandemic, businesses and individuals who lost their livelihoods, and to compensate victims of this virus, individuals directly impacted by the pandemic, be they senior citizens, meatpacking plant workers, or others who worked in close quarters with others and risked heightened exposure, some of them still suffering from long-term effects. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Commissioner Morgan? Doug?
I want to just respond, and Commissioner Garcia can correct me on this, but my understanding is it is not going to be funds for illegal aliens, is my understanding.
Well, from the research and inquiries we made of some of these nonprofits who deal with these people, they don't differentiate between legal and illegal.
Well, I'll yield to some of the other people that are going to speak, but that's my understanding.
Commissioner Garcia?
Thank you. I find it interesting that just because the word immigrant or an immigrant population is involved in this project, we automatically defer to a illegal immigrant conversation. It also, as mentioned, involves refugee population. Refugee population has been allowed here legally by the United States government for various reasons, as we know, in regards to refugee resettlement. So none of them are illegal by any means. I myself come from an immigrant family. My mother is from Honduras. She is a naturalized citizen, very proud to be a citizen. She benefited from this kind of project in her day by taking English classes in the local community, by taking citizenship classes in the local community. She was not an illegal immigrant, even though she was an immigrant. So you're making a very big assumption here that just because there's immigrant families involved here, that all of a sudden, some way, somehow, you have solved this mystery. That's not true. That this money is for illegal immigrants. So that's an interesting assumption there. So this project is geared towards especially local families in the Gifford Park community. If you've been there and have spent time there, like Linda and Jose Garcia live there in Gifford Park, for example, and they're like second or third generation Mexican Americans. So just because there's a Garcia name involved or a Latino surname involved doesn't mean they're illegal immigrants. They've been here for like 100 years, their family. So we're definitely making assumptions here that I would say are untrue. This project will do a lot of good for our local families. So thank you.
Thank you. There is, Larry? Oh, sorry. Hang on a minute. Commissioner Kavanaugh, I didn't see your hand.
Thank you. And I don't know if these lights work at all.
They don't, not on yet.
That's unfortunate.
Not yet.
The project that we're talking about that I support and have dedicated funds to is spearheaded by Katie Weitz and the Weitz family, who have devoted a lot of time and energy and resources of their own to see that this really magnificent building is not only preserved, but improved and repurposed for the benefit of our entire community. The fact that it provides some welcoming space for new immigrants to our society is a good thing, something that we should celebrate and support. We're all a result of immigrants to our society, either directly or over the generations. And I want to commend Katie and her family for their great support in this. It would not have happened without Katie Weitz and her leadership and vision. And this is going to be a great thing. I look forward to the ribbon cutting in the very near future. And I'm proud of the fact that we're able to use some of our ARPA funds for one of truly the best projects that we're funding over this entire rescue plan initiative. So thank you, Katie, and your team. I look forward to the great work that the Yates Illuminates project is going to provide to our city and to generations to come. Thank you.
Commissioner Friend.
Thank you, Thank you, Madam Chair. Through this process already, I got here. I got to the board at the end of the COVID or the initial round of COVID distribution, and I've been here for the extent of the ARPA appropriation and the ARPA distribution. And the interesting part about it is I can tell you that I've sat through countless hearings, read countless pages of documentation on these what I would consider all worthy organizations, but a lot of them I just don't philosophically agree with. But the funny thing is I have to set that aside. I don't know necessarily how I feel about the Yates, about the organization and how it meshes with my philosophy. What I can tell you is the ARPA funding has put governmental subdivisions in uncharted waters. We have never seen anything quite like this. Now, federal distribution comes in a lot of different forms, but never anything quite like this. And the uncharted waters part indicates that the feds turn around, they hand the states and governmental subdivisions dollars. And for the most part, there are hardly any strings attached. The regulatory requirements are very loose. I said this a long time ago, and I still look at it, and I shake my head because I go, who qualifies and who doesn't? And we've charted help from outside organizations to help us understand what those regulatory requirements are. The feds have done, in my opinion, and you want some ideological stuff from me, the feds have done us no economic favors with this ARPA funding. They gave the states essentially trillions of dollars that have sent inflation to a certain degree to a new level and has put us in a situation where there's a lot of reasons for inflation, right? We know that. I mean, I'll mention Putin. Commissioner Kavanaugh was talking about that earlier. Certainly a factor. There's all kinds of things happening, but the ARPA funding did not help. Mortgage interest rates are going to start going up. The prime has already gone up, and we've got issues that type of distribution from the feds actually had a contributing factor to. So what we need to do as a county board, and what other elected officials and policymakers have to do, I'm preaching, but we need to attempt to appropriate these dollars and attach metrics and success stories to the dollars that are appropriated. And I'm very comfortable that a solid portion of the distributions we've already made, we're either going to see success stories or we're going to see people who just missed the mark. Now, there's nothing attached. Nothing says that the county board has to go out and measure these metrics. But I think we're going to get them back, and we're going to see those success stories. That's all we've got, folks. We don't have anything else to do. We've got to get rid of this money. And again, like I said, I think it has a bad economic impact, but that's not my role. My role is to actually figure out how our role, I think, is how to figure out how to get this money into the hands of the people that are going to help the most people in Douglas County. And I'll end with this. I said this a couple weeks ago, or a week ago, and I mean it. If we didn't want to pick winners and losers, we'd have given everybody in this county $100. That's what it amounts to. That's what the ARPA funding amounts to. That I and Chris and PJ and Marianne might have got some. We all would have got $100, and you two, everybody everybody would have got $100. The bottom line is, what good would that have done? What could I have done with that? Now we have an opportunity, and hopefully this opportunity pays off. I plan on looking at the metrics. I plan on looking at success stories, and if they're there, I think we're going to be able to raise our hands and say we did something. So anyway, I digress. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other comments? Larry?
Larry Storer, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. Mr. Kagan is right. And excuse me, but we do need to use the word illegal. I'm not against helping anybody, but I am against funding illegals, people that come across this border and will not assimilate to this culture. This is my culture, not theirs. We should not fund any, we should stop them at the border. We should get them out of here. ARPA funding was on the news last night, ladies and gentlemen, NBC, Mr. Lester Holtz, exposing the fraud involved in ARPA. Somebody mentioned $1, give everybody $1. Doesn't that sound like political graft? Why are we giving away all of our tax dollars that I paid in and you paid in, that most everybody paid in except maybe illegals, giving it away and breaking the bank? There is no end to it. You cannot control that. All kinds of gangsters, illegals, and maybe even city county people are going after this money for anything under the sun except for me. I want a new belt. Can I get it with ARPA funding? I don't think that's what it was intended to do. You need a new furnace, a new heating and air system, or a new speaker system. Public school does out at the school board. You can't understand them. That's stuff that should be budgeted by your bodies or the businesses out of their own money somehow, or raise taxes to pay for it, not run to the federal government. What a mass rush towards socialism, towards democracy, democracy from there to tyranny. We're not a democracy. I'm for every immigrant. I'm originally an immigrant, for God's sakes. I have a relative that came over on the Mayflower. They weren't born here. The Spanish and the French that were here before the Mayflower got here, they weren't born here. What the difference is, welcome them if they want to assimilate. If they don't want to assimilate, get them out and don't pay them my tax dollars. Thank you.
Was there a motion and a second? Okay. The only thing that I would like to say is, whether you agree or disagree with the ARPA funding being provided to local governments, we looked at it, and I think I can speak collectively, we looked at it as opportunity to help our community that had been in a world of hurt like many others across the country during COVID. And again, you can agree or disagree how all of that was handled, but we were handed dollars from the federal government to be able to invest back in our communities to help folks get back to where they need to be. I think that we have taken the most open, the most transparent, and the most accountable process on where our dollars are being spent, because we could easily, and I think we will, like we did with CARES Act, at the end of this, have Joe come up and go through where those dollars were
Echo,
spent.
stop.
Whoops. I know, well, where those dollars were spent. And again, regardless of whether you know or don't know, or support or don't support organizations that other commissioners bring forward for investment, it's, again, we agreed as a board, and I thought it was a brilliant idea of Commissioner Boyle's, actually, to be able to allow commissioners a certain allocation to use specifically within their districts. Because we know best, we represent those districts, we represent everybody, but we know the needs within our districts. And I think everybody has been very studious in going and looking at what those dollars should be spent on, and where organizations we could partner with. And really, that's, for me, what it's about. It's truly those public-private partnerships that we value. We have it as a value statement as Douglas County, and we have valued those public-private partnerships to be able to address issues that not only arise in our districts, but arise in county as a whole. So I want to reiterate that this money is not going towards illegals, and that the group who is getting this funding has done stellar work in our community. And I do support the commissioners that are investing in this opportunity. So thank you. And with that, please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
We do have one other ARPA funding investment, the approval of a resolution authorizing the award of $50,000 to Women's Center for Advancement for. Oh, she didn't have her hand. I didn't think she wanted to. Roger asked, but nobody said anything. Okay. Okay. Thank you. No, thank you. The ARPA funding resolution authorizing the award of $50,000 to Women's Center for Advancement for Program for Safety and Mental Health Services for Victims of Domestic Violence, $50,000 to Legal Aid of Nebraska for Civil Legal Assistance Program, $100,000 to Together Inc. for a Homeless Prevention Program, $50,000 to the Simple Foundation for Youth Life Skill Development. This equates to equals $250,000 from the allocation from Commissioner Garcia's investment into his program. So do you want to say anything?
Briefly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so you have the descriptions here. These were discussed more extensively at the ARPA committee. So the only thing I'll say at this point is that if we could take the Women's Center for Advancement separately, I'm on that board, so I'll abstain from that one technically. But with that being said, if I can motion on the other three, Legal Aid, Together Inc., and Simple Foundation.
Okay, is there a motion for that? Commissioner Boyle made the motion and Commissioner Rogers seconded. Any other questions or comments?
It'll take us a second here to update it. I'll let you know when we're ready.
Thank you.
And you got it was all of them except for the women's advancement?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. All right, thank you, Commissioners. Commissioner Kavanaugh. Motion passes 7-0.
And now do we have a motion to approve the $50,000 for Women's Center for Advancement? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, seconded by Commissioner Rogers. Any questions or comments? Please vote.
Motion passes. Commissioner Garcia abstaining, all other commissioners voting yes.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
With that, we will move to community services. We have one reallocation of the 2021-22 Visitors Improvement Fund Grant Award for South Omaha Neighborhood Association. Is there motion by Commissioner Rogers, seconded by Commissioner, I don't know who made it, Commissioner Boyle, Commissioner Morgan. Any questions or comments? You want to say something, Commissioner Boyle?
Yep, it's just a quick comment. This is, again, is just reallocation of funds that were already given. It has to do with just changing the location of a mural, from what I understand. So, all right, great, thank you.
There is someone, well, come to the
sculpture.
Podium, please.
Okay, yeah, come on up.
And state your name for us.
Richard Harrison, working with South Omaha Neighborhood Alliance and the South Omaha Mural Project. And it'll be, the only correction I wanted to say is that unlike most of our projects, this won't be a mural, it'll be a sculpture.
Oh,
very good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right, please vote.
We, Commissioner Friend, did you mean to vote yes?
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I think we cut you off earlier. Motion passes 7-0, just noting that Commissioner Friend is voting yes. So,
Thank you.
Would you like to say something?
Oh, I wanted to ask, and maybe this isn't the correct body to make this choice, but in the past, we've had funds paid to us instead of quarterly all at once because we're going to do this project in the next month. If this body is the body to make that choice, I'd request that those funds be allocated in one payment rather than in four.
We'll have someone contact you after
Okay, thank you.
the board meeting. Thank you. With that, we'll move to Human Resources, the weekly personnel report from Civil Service as presented, unless anyone has any questions or comments. And then the legislative issues. It's been pretty busy still down there. We're on day 50 today. I do want to report that the judiciary advance of LB 21, which was Senator Lathrop's, if you remember, that changed the sentencings of imprisonment for those who had certain felonies. But that's been, the contents of the bill has been replaced with a committee amendment. And that committee amendment includes portions of two bills that Senator John Kavanaugh has prioritized. And it is providing the Medicaid enrollment assistance to inmates prior to release from incarceration. And then LB 1223, which was Matt Hansen's, and it was require reimbursement for lodging certain defendants in county jails and require state hospitals to maintain beds for certain patients. And we did work with both Senators Matt Hansen and Senator Steve Lathrop on that amendment language, and so we were happy to see that. Yesterday, I was down in the rotunda for the debate on LR 263 constitutional amendment by Senator Blood, which was a constitutional amendment to require the legislature to reimburse political subdivisions as prescribed. And during that hearing, there were a lot of comments made. So between now and select, I don't think, there's work that needs to be done on comments or questions that had come up during the debate from various senators. And so again, this is one that for probably 50 years, but 30 years, I can tell you for sure, has been talked about from within this jurisdiction about those unfunded mandates and shifts, tax shifts that the state does to not only county governments, but other local governments. And so we'll see where it goes. It still has work, but there were a lot of good comments and a lot of things that, again, that I think we have to continue to work on as we move forward with that. And so with that, there is no other legislation I have to report on. Larry?
They're getting pretty tired of seeing me today, but those people down in Lincoln are really working hard. You probably wouldn't have to stay so late if they'd have done their business faster during the year. But there's quite a few issues down there that interest me. And once again, unfortunately, one of them is the CRT and CSE standards through the Nebraska Board of Education. Some of these people are unelected bodies, so they think they can do things and talk about things, but it's not actually official policy. However, you see it in the schools. Just the other day, for example, in the World Herald even, my goodness, West Side Equity and Inclusion Initiative is gaining traction after all these months of pandemic-related delays. And this is out in the public domain and on their own website, so I'm going to mention it. This is a Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom issue paper that was published on critical race theory infecting the public schools. So I'm going to close with, ladies and gentlemen, present you with a copy of what I sent to the Government Education and Military Affairs Committee. LR 14 was passed. I don't know whether Washington has got it yet or not, but that's Nebraska's petition for a convention of states, which either way it settles out appears to be very necessary nowadays. Since we're sliding real quickly towards democracy, we need to remind our government what their job is and who elected them, who they represent. I believe it was all about we the people, not them. But needing to be debated in these chambers as well as the city council and neighborhood groups is who the Convention of States is really for. If you know your history, you know that they weren't talking about sending legislators or whole bodies of legislatures like the state legislature to this Convention of States. Why would you do that when they already have specifically expressed in Article 5 the right to submit proposed amendments? Only proposed. You can't, there's no truth to the fact of a constitutional convention. It was never in the framers' minds. So those were the first two expressed things, but implied in the next sentence or so, or the next phrase, is what they used to refer to as the states before we were a national government. At the colonies, they were talking the states are the people in those states, not the legislatures who were probably the king's legislature, the loyalists. So read it, think about it, and then start talking about it here and start forming your own representatives for a convention of states. But don't let delegates be legislators, and don't let them tell you who and who can't and what they can say or what they can't say. That's what they did down here in Lincoln. So that LR 14 is not valid, not really constitutional. And you should try to vote against it and have it rescinded. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on legislation? With that, it brings us to executive session. We do need to go into executive session for labor negotiations. Is there a motion to that fact? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Rogers. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Recording stopped.
give staff work.
So you got my vote.
Yep, I got you. Motion passes all with the commissioner present voting yes.
Thank you.
So,
Do you understand?